Captain Derek Hollis stood on the bridge of the Terran Defiance, watching the Galactic Council's elite fleet formation through the viewport, and honestly, he was having a hard time not laughing. These guys had apparently conquered half the known galaxy with what looked like flying geometric shapes that someone's kid had designed during a particularly uninspired art class. "Captain," his tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Brooks, said with barely concealed amusement, "the Zephyrian Admiral is requesting another strategy meeting." "Another one?" Derek rubbed his temples. "That's what, the fifth one today? At this rate, the war will be over before they finish deciding what color to paint their battle plans." The thing about the Galactic Council's approach to warfare was that it was very polite, very structured, very much like a chess game played by people who had read a book about chess but had never actually seen anyone play it with any passion whatsoever. Admiral Krikstal, a 7-foot-tall mantis-looking creature with an unfortunate tendency to speak in what could only be described as galactic bureaucrat-ese, had spent the last 3 days explaining their proven methodology for dealing with the Devourers, the galaxy's latest existential threat. The methodology apparently involved a lot of formation flying, synchronized laser light shows, and enough tactical meetings to make a corporate board retreat look spontaneous. "Sir," Brooks continued, "they're also requesting we maintain our position in the rear guard." Of course they are. Derek had expected this. Humans were the new kids on the galactic block, barely 50 years since first contact. And despite their impressive technological achievements, the Council still treated them like that relative who shows up to family dinner with a suspicious casserole, appreciated for participating, but not really trusted with the important stuff. The irony wasn't lost on him that these same aliens had come crawling to Earth when their standard tactics had failed spectacularly against the Devourers for the past 6 months. Derek activated the comm. "Admiral Krikstal, this is Captain Hollis. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Try not to start without me. I know how wild these strategy sessions can get." 20 minutes later, Derek found himself in what the Zephyrians generously called a war room, but which looked more like a corporate conference room designed by someone who had only heard conference rooms described secondhand. The holographic display in the center showed the current battlefield, a star system with 12 planets, 7 of which were already showing signs of Devourer infestation. "The situation remains challenging," Admiral Krikstal was saying, his 4 arms gesturing at the display in a way that somehow managed to convey both authority and complete bewilderment. "Our latest engagement resulted in a tactical withdrawal." "You mean you got your asses kicked?" Derek said conversationally. The room went silent. Apparently, tactical honesty wasn't big in Council military culture. "Captain Hollis," Admiral Krikstal said stiffly, "we prefer to maintain a more professional terminology." "Right, sorry. You got your asses kicked professionally." Commander Tethra, a blue-skinned humanoid from the Andromedan Collective, leaned forward. "Captain, perhaps you could share your species' tactical insights. Your preliminary reports suggest unconventional approaches." Derek looked around the room at the assembled alien officers. They all had that same expression, polite interest mixed with barely concealed skepticism, like adults humoring a child who wanted to explain their crayon drawing. "Well," Derek said, settling back in his chair, "I guess the first question is, how exactly have you been fighting these things?" What followed was a presentation that would have made a PowerPoint consultant weep with joy. Charts, graphs, tactical matrices, probability assessments, risk management protocols. The Galactic Council had turned warfare into a quarterly business review. "And as you can see from slide 47, Admiral Krikstal was saying, our synchronized bombardment patterns achieve a 12.7% effectiveness rating against Devourer bioships." 12%, Derek repeated slowly. "0.7. corrected Commander Tethra helpfully. "Right, 12.7%, and you've been using this strategy for 6 months. The methodology is sound," Admiral Krikstal insisted. "Our tactical computers have run extensive simulations." "Have they run simulations on what happens when you try something completely different?" The room exchanged glances. Apparently, this was a novel concept. "Captain," said General Vorth, a crystalline being whose voice sounded like wind chimes in a tornado, "chaos theory suggests that unpredictable tactics would be unpredictable." Derek stared at him. "Yes, that's exactly the point. But how would we coordinate unpredictable tactics?" asked Commander Tethra. "How would we ensure proper formation integrity? How would we maintain communication protocols?" And there it was. The fundamental difference between how humans and apparently everyone else in the galaxy approached the concept of warfare. For the Council, war was a problem to be solved through proper procedure and synchronized execution. For humans, well, Humans had learned warfare from a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of creative violence. "Look," Derek said, standing up and walking to the holographic display. "Can I show you something?" He activated his personal tablet and linked it to the display system. The tactical map disappeared, replaced by a historical Earth military briefing. "This is footage from something we called World War II. Specifically, a battle called D-Day." The display showed grainy black and white footage of landing craft approaching a beach under heavy fire. "Now, according to your tactical philosophy, this should have been a disaster. Thousands of soldiers landing on a heavily defended beach with no formation integrity, limited communication, and a plan that basically amounted to run toward the guys shooting at you and try not to die." The alien officers watched in what Derek could only describe as horror, as the footage showed chaos, explosions, and what appeared to be complete tactical anarchy. "By your standards," Derek continued, "this was the worst possible approach. No synchronized patterns, no probability matrices, no risk assessment protocols. Just controlled chaos on a massive scale." "And the result?" Admiral Krikstal asked, though he sounded like he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "It worked. Not only did it work, it was the beginning of the end for one of the most militarily effective organizations in human history." Derek switched to another display, this one showing more recent footage from various human military engagements. "This is how humans fight wars. We don't rely on formations or synchronized patterns or tactical computers that take 3 hours to calculate the optimal firing solution. We adapt. We improvise. We make it up as we go along, and we do it better than anyone expects." Commander Tethra was studying the displays with fascination. "But how do you coordinate? How do you ensure your forces are working together?" "We don't. Not the way you think about it, anyway. We give our people objectives and let them figure out how to achieve them. We trust them to make good decisions under pressure instead of trying to micromanage every move from a command center." "That sounds—" General Vorth paused, his crystalline structure flickering. "Terrifying." "To you, maybe. To the Devourers?" Derek grinned. "It's about to be a very educational experience." 3 hours later, Derek was back on the bridge of the Terran Defiance, preparing for what he privately thought of as Advanced Warfare 101, Human Edition. The Council fleet was arranged in their standard formation, neat, orderly, and about as threatening as a parade float. The Terran Defiance and her sister ships were positioned in the rear, exactly where the Council had requested. "Captain," Brooks reported, "Devourer bioships detected at the edge of the system. Estimated time to engagement, 47 minutes. Perfect. Signal the fleet. All human vessels are to maintain radio silence and prepare for independent operations." "Sir?" Brooks looked confused. "The Council's battle plan calls for synchronized—" "I know what their battle plan calls for. We're not following it." Derek activated the shipwide comm. "All hands, this is the captain. In about 45 minutes, we're going to show the galaxy how humans really fight wars. I want you to remember that we're not here to follow someone else's playbook. We're here to win. Use your training, trust your instincts, and let's give these Devourers a proper introduction to Earth-style warfare." On the main display, the enemy fleet was becoming visible. Dozens of bioships that looked like someone had crossbred a squid with a nightmare, and then given it delusions of grandeur. "Captain," his communications officer reported, "Admiral Krikstal is requesting we maintain formation and await his signal to commence synchronized bombardment." "Acknowledged. Tell the Admiral we'll be happy to provide support as needed." Derek had no intention of lying to the alien commander. He just had a different definition of support than the Council did. The engagement began exactly as Derek had expected. The Council fleet moved into their perfect formation, aligned their weapons with mathematical precision, and opened fire in a synchronized pattern that was beautiful, orderly, and about as effective as throwing paper airplanes at a tank. The Devourers, for their part, seemed genuinely confused by the display. Their bioships paused in their advance, apparently trying to figure out what exactly the Council fleet was attempting to accomplish. "Captain," Brooks reported, "Council forces are achieving approximately 12% effectiveness, sir." ".7, Derek added dryly. "Don't forget the .7. This went on for 15 minutes. The Council fleet maintained their formation, fired their synchronized volleys, and accomplished absolutely nothing except confirming that their tactical computers were very good at calculating the exact rate at which they were failing. The Devourers, apparently deciding that the Council posed no real threat, began their own attack pattern, a swarming, chaotic assault that completely ignored every rule of proper military engagement. "Council fleet is taking heavy casualties," Brooks reported. "Admiral Krikstal is requesting immediate assistance." "Well," Derek said, settling into his command chair, "I suppose it's time to provide that support we promised." He activated the fleet comm. All human vessels, this is Captain Hollis. The word is given. Show them how we do things. What happened next would later be described by galactic military historians as either brilliant tactical innovation or complete insanity, depending on who you asked. The human fleet scattered. Not in retreat, though that's what it looked like to the horrified council commanders, but in what could best be described as organized chaos. Each ship broke formation and began operating independently, attacking targets of opportunity with no apparent coordination or overall strategy. The Terran Defiance dove straight into the middle of the Devourer swarm, firing on multiple targets simultaneously, while pulling maneuvers that made her inertial dampeners scream in protest. The New York's Revenge flanked wide and began picking off isolated bioships with precision strikes. The Prairie Fire somehow ended up behind the enemy formation and was systematically working her way through their rear guard. "Captain!" Brooks called out over the sound of weapons fire and emergency alerts. "We've got 4 bioships converging on our position." "I see them. Deploy countermeasures and prepare for evasive maneuvers." "Sir, the tactical computer recommends we fall back and regroup with the Council fleet." "Override the tactical computer. Sometimes the best defense is a really aggressive offense." The Terran Defiance accelerated directly toward the converging bioships, launched every missile she had, and then used the explosions as cover to slip through their formation and emerge on the other side, where she proceeded to systematically disable their propulsion systems. Meanwhile, the Council fleet was watching this display with what Derek could only imagine was complete bewilderment. "Captain Hollis," Admiral Crickstall's voice came over the comm, sounding slightly strained. "Your fleet appears to have abandoned all tactical coordination. Are you experiencing technical difficulties?" "Negative, Admiral. We're operating at peak efficiency." "But your ships are scattered across the entire battlefield." "How are you maintaining command and control?" Derek paused in the middle of coordinating a 3-ship pincer movement to consider how to explain this concept to someone whose idea of tactical flexibility was adjusting the firing sequence by 0.3 seconds. "Admiral, let me ask you something. When you stub your toe on a piece of furniture, do you need to consult with your central nervous system before you start hopping around and cursing?" What? "Do you need tactical coordination to pull your hand away from something hot? Do you need formation integrity to duck when something's thrown at your head?" There was a pause. "No, but those are automatic responses." "Exactly. That's what you're seeing. Automatic responses, but scaled up and applied to warfare. Every human ship out there is reacting to threats and opportunities as they develop, without waiting for orders from a central command authority." On the main display, the battle was shifting dramatically. The Devourers, who had been dominating the engagement against the Council fleet, were suddenly finding themselves facing enemies who refused to behave predictably. Every time they moved to counter one human ship, 3 others would hit them from unexpected angles. "Sir," Brooks reported with obvious satisfaction, "enemy casualties are approaching 60%. Our casualties are minimal." Derek nodded. This was going better than he'd hoped. The Devourers were learning the same lesson that countless human enemies had learned throughout history, that sometimes the most effective military strategy is to have no strategy at all. "Captain," his communications officer called out, "the Prairie Fire is requesting permission to attempt something called a Crazy Ivan." Derek grinned. "Tell Captain Martinez he's cleared for whatever insane maneuver he's got in mind." The Prairie Fire suddenly spun end over end, while firing in all directions, creating a sphere of weapons fire that caught 3 Devourer bioships completely off guard. It was tactically unsound, strategically questionable, and absolutely devastating. Admiral Crickstall's voice came over the comm again, this time with what sounded like genuine awe. "Captain Hollis, how did you coordinate that maneuver?" "We didn't. Captain Martinez saw an opportunity and took it." "That's what we do. But without central coordination, how do you prevent your forces from interfering with each other?" Derek watched as the New York's Revenge and the Terran Defiance simultaneously engaged the same target from opposite sides, their weapons fire perfectly synchronized despite having no communication between them. "Training and trust, Admiral. We train our people to think independently, and then we trust them to make good decisions." "Works pretty well, as you can see." The battle was essentially over. The surviving Devourer bioships were in full retreat, apparently having decided that fighting an enemy who refused to follow the rules of proper military engagement was more trouble than it was worth. "All human vessels," Derek announced over the fleet comm. "Excellent work. Begin damage assessment and prepare for SAR operations." The aftermath was interesting. The Council fleet, which had spent the entire engagement firing synchronized volleys at empty space, was suddenly faced with the reality that the humans, the species they'd relegated to the rear guard, had just accomplished more in 30 minutes than the combined Council forces had achieved in 6 months. Derek found himself back in the war room, facing the same group of alien officers. This time, however, their expressions were somewhat different. Less polite skepticism, more stunned bewilderment. "Captain Hollis," Admiral Crichton began slowly, "your tactical performance was unprecedented. Thank you. I must admit, I'm having difficulty understanding how you achieved such coordination without Central Command authority." Derek looked around the room at the assembled officers. These were experienced military leaders from species that had been fighting wars for millennia, and they were all staring at him like he'd just performed magic. "It's not really that complicated," he said. "You just have to accept that sometimes the best plan is to not have a plan." General Vorth's crystalline structure flickered rapidly. "But how do you train for that? How do you prepare for no plan?" "You prepare by training your people to think, not just to follow orders. You give them the tools and knowledge they need, and then you trust them to use those tools effectively." Commander Tethra leaned forward. "But surely there must be some underlying coordination protocol, some hidden command structure." Derek shook his head. "Nope. What you saw was 37 independent ship commanders, each making their own tactical decisions based on their training and the immediate situation. No predetermined strategy, no synchronized patterns, no formation integrity requirements. That's..." Admiral Crichton paused, searching for words. "That's chaos. Controlled chaos," Derek corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there? How can chaos be controlled?" Derek thought about this for a moment. How do you explain to someone who's spent their entire military career following precise protocols that sometimes the most effective approach is to throw the protocols out the airlock? "Tell me something, Admiral. In your personal life, when you encounter an unexpected problem, do you convene a committee to develop a strategic response plan?" "Of course not, but..." "So you're capable of independent problem solving. You can assess a situation, identify possible solutions, and take action without waiting for instructions from a higher authority." "Yes, but that's different. That's just everyday life." "Exactly. We just apply everyday problem-solving skills to military situations. Instead of trying to predict every possible scenario and develop predetermined responses, we train our people to adapt to whatever actually happens." The room was quiet for several minutes as the alien officers processed this concept. Finally, Commander Tethra spoke up. "Captain, would it be possible for our forces to observe your training methods? Perhaps learn from your approach?" Derek considered this. The idea of teaching alien military forces human combat tactics was either brilliantly forward-thinking or a catastrophically bad idea, depending on how you looked at it. "I suppose we could arrange some joint exercises," he said carefully. "Though I should warn you, it's going to require a pretty fundamental shift in how you think about military command structure." "What kind of shift?" asked General Vorth. "Well, for starters, you're going to have to learn to trust your subordinates to make decisions without checking with you first." The expressions around the room suggested that this was roughly equivalent to asking them to trust their subordinates to perform brain surgery without medical training. "But how do you ensure they make the correct decisions?" Admiral Crichton asked. "You don't. You ensure they make informed decisions, and you accept that sometimes those decisions will be wrong. The key is to make sure that when someone does make a mistake, it doesn't doom the entire operation." Derek stood up and walked to the holographic display, which was now showing the aftermath of the battle. Human ships were scattered across the system, conducting rescue operations and damage assessment with the same independent efficiency they'd shown during combat. "Look at this," he said, gesturing to the display. 37 ships, operating independently, and they're naturally organizing themselves into search and rescue patterns without any central coordination. No one told them to do this. They're doing it because it's the logical response to the current situation. "But surely someone is in overall command," Commander Tethra insisted. "I am technically, but I'm not micromanaging their operations. I set the general objective, help the survivors and assess our capabilities, and they're figuring out how to accomplish that objective." Admiral Crichton was studying the display intently. "And if one of your commanders makes a mistake? If they misinterpret the situation or choose an inappropriate response? Then they learn from it, and the other commanders learn from it, and we all get better. That's how it works." "That seems inefficient," Derek laughed. "Inefficient? Admiral, we just destroyed a Devourer fleet that had been kicking your ass for 6 months. We did it in 30 minutes, with minimal casualties, using tactics that your computers would have rejected as impossible. How is that inefficient?" The room fell silent again. Derek was beginning to think that challenging their fundamental assumptions about military efficiency might not be the most diplomatic approach. But honestly, someone needed to point out that their efficient methods had been failing spectacularly. Captain, General Vorth said slowly, perhaps you could explain how your species developed these unconventional approaches. Derek settled back into his chair, wondering how to explain several thousand years of human military evolution to species that had apparently never discovered the concept of battlefield improvisation. Well, it probably helps that humans have been fighting wars against other humans for our entire recorded history. We've never had the luxury of facing enemies who followed the same tactical doctrines we did. What do you mean? Asked Commander Tethra. I mean that every human military conflict has involved opponents who thought differently, fought differently, and refused to behave predictably. We learned early on that rigid tactical systems were a good way to get killed by someone who was willing to try something completely different. Derek activated his tablet again and brought up another historical display. This is a battle called Cannae, fought about 2,200 years ago. The Roman army, which was considered the most professional, well-organized military force in the world at the time, was completely destroyed by a smaller force led by a general named Hannibal. The display showed tactical diagrams of the battle, with neat Roman formations being systematically encircled and destroyed by more flexible enemy forces. The Romans had better equipment, better training, better logistics, and superior numbers. They should have won easily. Instead, they lost about 70,000 men in a single day because their enemy refused to fight the way Romans expected enemies to fight. Admiral Kriegstahl was studying the diagrams with obvious interest. And this influenced your military development? This, and about 10,000 other examples like it. Humans learned that tactical flexibility was more important than tactical perfection. We learned to expect the unexpected and to be ready to adapt when our carefully planned strategies inevitably fell apart. Derek switched to another display, this one showing more recent conflicts. Fast forward a couple thousand years, and the same principles still apply. During something we called the Vietnam War, the most technologically advanced military in human history spent 10 years fighting an enemy that refused to engage in conventional warfare. Despite massive advantages in equipment and firepower, the advanced military ultimately withdrew because they couldn't adapt to an opponent who made up tactics as they went along. And the lesson your species learned from this was, General Vorth prompted, that sometimes the side that's willing to be more creative wins, regardless of who has the better technology or more impressive formations. Derek stood up and walked around the table, looking at each of the alien officers in turn. That's what you're up against with the Devourers. They're not following your rules. They're not engaging in the kind of structured, predictable warfare that your tactical computers are designed to handle. They're adapting and improvising, and they're beating you because you're not adapting and improvising back. Commander Tethra leaned forward. So your recommendation is that we abandon our proven methodologies in favor of, what? Chaos? My recommendation is that you start thinking of warfare as a creative problem-solving exercise instead of a predetermined algorithm. Stop trying to fight the battle you planned for and start fighting the battle you're actually in. The meeting broke up shortly after that, with the alien officers clearly needing time to process concepts that challenged their fundamental assumptions about military command and control. Derek wasn't entirely sure whether they'd actually implement any changes, but at least they were asking the right questions. 3 days later, Derek found himself observing joint training exercises between human and council forces. The results were educational. Admiral Kriegstahl to all units, came the voice over the comm. Prepare to engage simulated enemy forces using improvised tactics. Derek winced. Telling someone to improvise was like telling them to be spontaneous. The instruction itself kind of defeated the purpose. What followed was a fascinating display of alien military forces trying desperately to act unpredictably while maintaining formation integrity, following communication protocols, and ensuring proper tactical coordination. It was like watching someone try to dance freestyle while following a choreography manual. Captain, Brooks observed, they're improvising in perfect formation. Yeah, I noticed that. Think they'll figure out the contradiction, or should we point it out? The exercise continued for another hour, with the council forces dutifully executing unpredictable maneuvers that had clearly been planned in advance and approved by committee. They maintained perfect spacing, textbook communication discipline, and flawless tactical coordination while attempting to demonstrate battlefield flexibility. Meanwhile, the human forces were doing what they always did, ignoring the exercise parameters, adapting to changing conditions, and making up new tactics on the fly. It was like watching a conversation between two people who spoke completely different languages. After the exercise, Derek found himself in another meeting with the alien commanders, who were looking increasingly frustrated. Captain Hollis, Admiral Kriegstahl began. We have attempted to implement your recommendations, but our forces seem unable to achieve the same level of tactical creativity. That's because you're still thinking about it wrong, Derek said gently. You can't order someone to be creative. You can't plan spontaneity. You can't coordinate independence. Then how do we learn these skills? Demanded General Vorth. Derek thought about this. How do you teach someone to stop following rules when rule following had been drilled into them for their entire military career? Start small, he suggested. Give your junior officers more independence in low-stakes situations. Let them make decisions without checking with their superiors first. Get them comfortable with the idea that there's usually more than one right answer to any given problem. But what if they make mistakes? Commander Tethra asked. They will. That's part of the learning process. The goal isn't to prevent mistakes. It's to minimize the consequences of mistakes and maximize the learning opportunities they provide. Admiral Krickstahl was quiet for several minutes, apparently wrestling with concepts that went against everything he'd been taught about proper military command structure. Captain, he said finally, would it be possible for some of our officers to serve aboard human vessels, to observe your methods firsthand? Derek considered this. Having alien observers aboard human military vessels raised all sorts of security and operational concerns, but it might be the only way to actually demonstrate the principles they'd been discussing. I think we could arrange something, he said, though I should warn you, it's going to be a pretty significant culture shock. 2 weeks later, Commander Tethra found herself aboard the Terran Defiance as an observer during what the humans euphemistically called a routine patrol. The patrol turned out to be anything but routine when they encountered a Devourer scouting force in an outer system. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Brooks reported. 3 bioships detected at bearing 047 Mark 15. They appear to be conducting reconnaissance. Derek nodded. Recommendations? We could withdraw and report their position to the Council fleet, suggested the navigation officer. Or we could engage and gather intelligence on their current capabilities, countered the tactical officer. Or we could follow them and see where they're going, added the science officer. Commander Tethra watched this exchange with fascination. On a council vessel, this situation would have triggered a formal tactical assessment, complete with risk analysis and probability calculations. The final decision would have been made by the commanding officer after reviewing detailed reports from each department. Instead, Derek was listening to informal suggestions from his officers, and apparently considering all of them equally. Good points all around, Derek said. Brooks, what's your gut feeling? I think they haven't detected us yet, sir. We could shadow them for a while, see what they're up to. Agreed. Take us to silent running and maintain a discreet distance. Just like that, the decision was made. No formal protocols, no committee review, no probability matrices. Just a quick assessment of the situation, and a command decision based on the collective input of the bridge crew. Captain Hollis, Commander Tethra said quietly. Shouldn't you consult with your tactical computers before making such a decision? Derek glanced at her. What would they tell me that I don't already know? That following an unknown enemy force into unknown space carries inherent risks? That we could be walking into a trap? That the smart play might be to withdraw and call for reinforcements? Well, yes, right. And if I were planning a major engagement, I'd want that kind of detailed analysis. But this is a developing situation that requires flexibility and quick thinking. By the time the computers finished their analysis, the opportunity would be gone. As if to prove his point, the tactical situation changed suddenly when the Devourer bioships altered course and began moving toward what appeared to be an abandoned mining station. Interesting, Derek murmured. They're not just scouting, they're looking for something specific. Sir, the science officer reported. I'm detecting energy signatures from that station. It's not abandoned. Someone's been using it recently. Plot intercept course, Derek ordered. But keep us hidden. I want to see what they're up to before we announce our presence. Commander Tethra realized she was witnessing something she'd never seen before in a military context. A command decision being modified in real time based on changing circumstances. On a council vessel, the original mission parameters would have been maintained regardless of new developments, or the crew would have been required to withdraw and request new orders. The next 20 minutes were a masterclass in adaptive tactics. As the situation continued to evolve, Derek and his crew adjusted their approach multiple times, always maintaining their primary objective while responding to new information. When it became clear that the Devourers were attempting to extract data from the mining station's computers, Derek made another snap decision. We can't let them get that information. All hands prepare for combat. The engagement that followed was brief but intense. The Terran Defiance attacked from an unexpected angle, disabled 2 of the bioships before they could respond, and forced the 3rd to retreat. The entire action took less than 10 minutes. Damage report, Derek called out. Minor hull scoring on Deck 7, no casualties, Brooks reported. The bioships didn't have time to mount an effective defense. Commander Tethera was stunned. The human crew had identified a threat, adapted their mission parameters, engaged the enemy, and achieved their objectives without any formal planning or tactical coordination meetings. "Captain," she said, "how did you know that attack would be successful?" Derek looked at her with surprise. "I didn't, but the alternatives were to let them escape with potentially valuable intelligence, or to wait for reinforcements while they completed their mission. Neither of those seemed like good options. But what if you had been wrong? What if it had been a trap? Then we would have dealt with that situation when it developed. But you can't let fear of unknown risks prevent you from taking action when action is clearly needed." The return trip to the Council fleet gave Commander Tethera time to process what she'd witnessed. She'd observed a human military unit operating with a level of flexibility and responsiveness that would have been impossible under Council command protocols. More importantly, she'd seen that this flexibility didn't result in chaos or confusion. Instead, it had allowed them to achieve objectives that would have been impossible using standard tactical approaches. When she submitted her report to Admiral Krickstall, she tried to capture not just what the humans had done, but how they had done it. "They don't just allow independent thinking," she wrote. "They require it. Every member of the crew is expected to contribute to tactical decision-making, regardless of rank or specialization. The commanding officer doesn't make decisions in isolation. He makes decisions based on input from his entire team." The report caused quite a stir in Council military circles. The idea that junior officers should be allowed, or expected, to influence tactical decisions was revolutionary. Admiral Krickstall called Derek for a private conference 3 days later. "Captain Hollis," he began, "Commander Tethera's report has raised some interesting questions about human military methodology." "I'm sure it has. She suggests that your success comes not from superior technology or training, but from a fundamentally different approach to command authority." Derek nodded. "That's a fair assessment. I must admit, I'm struggling to understand how such an approach could be systematically implemented. How do you ensure consistent results when every engagement is handled differently?" Derek thought about this. How do you explain to someone that consistency of results doesn't require consistency of methods? "Admiral, let me ask you something. Do you get the same results every time you have a conversation?" "I'm not sure I understand the question." "Every conversation you have is different, right? Different topics, different participants, different circumstances. But you still communicate effectively, even though you're not following a predetermined script." "Well, yes, but same principle applies to military operations. The specific tactics we use vary depending on the situation, but the underlying principles remain consistent. Assess the situation, identify objectives, adapt to changing circumstances, and trust your people to make good decisions." There was a long pause. "Captain, would it be possible to arrange for more Council officers to serve as observers aboard human vessels?" Derek smiled. "I think that could be arranged, Admiral. Though I should warn you, once your people get used to thinking independently, it's going to be very hard to get them to go back to following predetermined tactical protocols." "Yes," Admiral Krickstall said thoughtfully. "I'm beginning to suspect that might be the point." 6 months later, Derek found himself back in the same war room, but the atmosphere was completely different. The holographic display showed the results of the latest engagement against the Devourers, a decisive victory achieved by a joint Human Council force operating under what had become known as adaptive tactical protocols. "Casualty report," Admiral Krickstall was saying, and Derek noticed that his tone was more confident than it had been in their early meetings. "Minimal losses across all participating vessels," reported Commander Tethera. "Enemy casualties estimated at 85% of their total force. Outstanding. And this was achieved with no predetermined tactical plan?" "Correct, sir. Individual unit commanders adapted their strategies based on real-time battlefield conditions." Derek leaned back in his chair and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The transformation hadn't been easy. Changing military culture never is. But the results spoke for themselves. The Devourers, who had been steadily conquering Council territory for over a year, were now in full retreat across multiple sectors. "Captain Hollis," Admiral Krickstall said, turning to him, "I believe an acknowledgement is in order. Your species' approach to warfare has proven most educational." "Thank you, Admiral. Though I should point out that you and your people did most of the heavy lifting once you figured out how to stop overthinking everything." General Vorth's crystalline structure flickered in what Derek had learned to recognize as amusement. "Captain, I must confess that stop overthinking was not advice I expected to receive from a military consultant." "Sometimes the best advice is the simplest advice," Derek replied. "Though I'll admit, Watching you all learn to trust your instincts has been pretty entertaining from my end. It was true. The transformation of Council military doctrine had been like watching a master chess player learn to play poker. All the analytical skills were there, but they'd had to unlearn the assumption that perfect information and predetermined strategies were prerequisites for success. Commander Tethra, who had become something of an evangelist for adaptive tactics, spoke up. Captain, there is one thing I'm still curious about. How did your species develop such confidence in independent decision-making? Most civilizations tend to centralize military authority as they advance technologically. Derek considered this. It was a good question, and one that got to the heart of why humans approached warfare so differently from everyone else in the galaxy. I think it comes down to our history, he said finally. Most species seem to have achieved interstellar travel through cooperation and unified effort. Humans got to space despite being fractured into competing nation-states that spent most of their time trying to kill each other. He activated his tablet and brought up a map of Earth showing political boundaries. When we developed space technology, we had nearly 200 separate governments, all with different military doctrines, all constantly trying to outmaneuver each other. We never had the luxury of assuming our enemies would think like us or fight like us. Admiral Krickstall studied the display with obvious fascination. 200 separate military commands on a single planet? Give or take, depending on the time period. The point is, we learned to expect that our opponents would have completely different approaches to warfare. Centralized command structures were a liability when you were fighting someone who might attack from any direction at any time, using tactics you'd never seen before. But surely this led to massive inefficiencies? General Vorth asked. Derek laughed. Oh, absolutely. We spent enormous resources preparing to fight each other instead of working together on common problems. But it also meant that human military doctrine evolved to handle any conceivable type of opponent. He switched the display to show historical battle maps from various human conflicts. Civil wars, colonial rebellions, asymmetric warfare, technological mismatches, guerrilla campaigns, conventional engagements. We fought every possible variation of armed conflict, usually against opponents who understood our capabilities and were specifically trying to counter them. Commander Tethra leaned forward. And this created a military culture that values adaptability over efficiency? More like it created a military culture that recognizes adaptability as the highest form of efficiency, Derek corrected. There's no point in having a perfectly optimized plan if your enemy refuses to cooperate with it. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the communications station. Admiral, the communications officer reported. We're receiving a priority transmission from the outer picket line. Long-range sensors are detecting a massive Devourer fleet movement. The mood in the room shifted immediately. Everyone turned to the main display as tactical data began streaming in. Fleet composition? Admiral Krickstall asked. Approximately 400 bioships, sir. Multiple vessel classes, including some configurations we haven't seen before. Derek felt a familiar tension building in his chest. This was the big one. The engagement that would determine whether the adaptive tactics they'd been developing could handle a large-scale confrontation. Estimated time to contact? He asked. 6 hours, sir. Admiral Krickstall was already moving into command mode. Signal all vessels to begin battle preparations. Department heads, I want recommendations for... Admiral. Derek interrupted gently. Krickstall paused and looked at him. What's the first thing we learned about adaptive tactics? There was a moment of silence as the Admiral processed the question. Then, almost reluctantly, he smiled. That you can't plan for unknown variables. Right. So instead of trying to develop a battle plan for an enemy fleet we haven't seen before, what should we be doing? Commander Tethra answered. Preparing our forces to adapt to whatever they encounter. Exactly. Derek stood up and walked to the display. We don't know what those new ship configurations are capable of. We don't know what tactics they'll use. We don't know how they'll respond to our approaches. But we do know that trying to predict all of that and develop countermeasures in advance is a waste of time. Admiral Krickstall nodded slowly. So our preparation should focus on ensuring our forces are ready to assess and respond to unknown threats. Now you're getting it. The next few hours were a fascinating study in how different military cultures prepare for battle. The human vessels focused on equipment checks, crew briefings, and what Derek privately called organized flexibility, making sure everyone understood their roles and capabilities without locking them into predetermined responses. The Council ships, meanwhile, were adapting their preparation routines to incorporate the lessons they'd learned. Instead of developing detailed tactical plans, they were running scenario exercises designed to improve their crew's ability to think independently under pressure. Derek found himself aboard the bridge of the Terran Defiance as the fleets approached each other. The main display showed both formations, The human council force arranged in a loose, flexible formation that could adapt quickly to changing circumstances, and the Devourer fleet approaching in what appeared to be a completely random pattern. "Captain," Brooks reported, "enemy fleet is... well, sir, they don't appear to have any formation at all." Derek studied the tactical display. Brooks was right. The Devourer bioships were scattered across a massive volume of space with no apparent organization or coordination. Interesting. They're either completely disorganized, or they're using a tactical approach we haven't seen before. "Sir," the science officer added, "I'm detecting some unusual energy signatures from the enemy fleet. It's almost like they're communicating, but not through any conventional means." Derek felt a chill of recognition. Biological communication. They're not using formation tactics because they don't need them. They're coordinating through some kind of organic network. This changed everything. All of the adaptive tactics they'd developed were based on the assumption that enemy forces would have command and communication limitations similar to their own. But if the Devourers could achieve perfect coordination without traditional communication systems... "Captain," Admiral Krickstall's voice came over the comm. "Are you seeing what we're seeing? If you're seeing an enemy fleet that can apparently coordinate perfectly without any visible command structure, then yes. Recommendations?" Derek found himself in the unusual position of not having a ready answer. This was exactly the kind of unknown variable that adaptive tactics were supposed to handle, but it was also unlike anything they'd prepared for. "Honestly, Admiral, I think we're about to find out how good we've gotten at thinking on our feet." The engagement began unlike any battle Derek had ever seen. Instead of maneuvering into attack positions, the entire Devourer fleet suddenly accelerated toward the Human Council formation as a coordinated mass, with individual bioships adjusting their courses in perfect synchronization without any apparent communication delays. "All ships," Derek announced over the fleet comm. "We're facing something new here. Standard adaptive protocols are in effect, but be ready for anything." What followed was the most chaotic, unpredictable, and ultimately educational battle of Derek's career. The Devourers attacked like a living organism rather than a military formation. Individual bioships would suddenly change course, accelerate, or alter their weapons configurations in response to threats or opportunities that weren't apparent to the Human Council forces until after the fact. But the Human Council fleet adapted. When traditional flanking maneuvers proved ineffective against an enemy that could instantly coordinate responses across hundreds of vessels, individual ship commanders began developing new approaches on the fly. The New York's Revenge discovered that rapid, unpredictable course changes could disrupt the Devourers' coordination, apparently by creating too many variables for their biological communication system to process simultaneously. The Prairie Fire found that focused attacks on individual bioships could create dead zones in the enemy network, temporarily isolating nearby vessels from the collective coordination. Council vessels, meanwhile, were applying their own innovations. A Zephyrian destroyer developed a technique of using sensor jamming to create false targets, exploiting the Devourers' reliance on biological perception. An Andromedan cruiser discovered that certain energy frequencies could interfere with the bioship's coordination network. "Captain," Brooks reported with obvious excitement, "I think we're winning this thing." Derek looked at the tactical display and had to agree. Despite facing an enemy with capabilities they'd never encountered before, the combined fleet was systematically dismantling the Devourer force through pure tactical innovation. "Sir," the communications officer added, "Admiral Krickstall is requesting a status report. Tell the Admiral that we're currently engaged in advanced tactical education, and the curriculum is going better than expected." The battle continued for another 2 hours, with both sides constantly adapting to each other's innovations. But the Human Council fleet had one crucial advantage. They were used to fighting opponents who didn't behave predictably. The Devourers, for all their biological coordination, had apparently never faced enemies who could match their adaptability. When the surviving Devourer bioships finally withdrew, they left behind the wreckage of nearly 300 vessels, and what Derek suspected was a very confused collective intelligence. "All ships stand down from combat alert," Admiral Krickstall announced over the fleet comm. "Damage reports and casualty assessments, please." The final tally was better than anyone had dared hope. The Human Council fleet had lost only 12 vessels, with moderate damage to perhaps 30 others. More importantly, they had proven that adaptive tactics could handle even completely unknown enemy capabilities. Derek found himself back in the war room one final time. But this meeting felt different from all the others. The alien officers who had once been skeptical of human military methods were now discussing tactical innovations with the enthusiasm of converts. The jamming technique developed by Captain Veltar proved highly effective, Commander Tethra was saying. We should incorporate similar approaches into standard tactical protocols. Should we? Derek asked mildly. The room went quiet as everyone turned to look at him. I mean, Derek continued, what happens when we face an enemy that's prepared for jamming techniques? Do we develop counter tactics? Do we create standard protocols for every possible innovation? Admiral Krickstahl caught on immediately. We'd be back where we started. Predetermined responses to predicted threats. Exactly. The point isn't to turn today's innovations into tomorrow's standard procedures. The point is to maintain the capability for innovation. General Vorth's crystalline structure flickered thoughtfully. So the lesson is not what we did, but how we learned to do it. Now you're thinking like a human, Derek said with a grin. As the meeting broke up and the various officers returned to their ships, Derek reflected on the changes he'd witnessed over the past months. The Galactic Council's military forces had transformed from rigid, procedure-bound organizations into genuinely adaptive fighting forces. More importantly, they had learned that the most effective military doctrine wasn't a doctrine at all. It was a philosophy of constant learning and adaptation. Admiral Krickstahl approached him as he was preparing to leave. Captain Hollis, the Admiral said, I want to thank you for what you've taught us. Though I suspect we've only begun to understand the full implications of these changes. Derek nodded. Just remember, Admiral, the moment you think you've figured it all out, that's when someone's going to surprise you with something completely different. Yes, Admiral Krickstahl replied thoughtfully. I believe that may be the most important lesson of all. As Derek made his way back to the Terran Defiance, he couldn't help but smile. The galaxy was a little bit safer, the Devourers were in full retreat, and most importantly, an entire civilization had learned that sometimes the best plan is to not have a plan. It was, he reflected, a very human kind of victory. Captain, Brooks greeted him as he stepped onto the bridge. Orders, sir? Derek settled into his command chair and looked out at the scattered fleet of human and alien vessels, each one now capable of independent thought and action in ways that would have been impossible just months before. Set course for home, Mr. Brooks. I think we've taught the galaxy enough chaos theory for one war. Aye, sir, course laid in. As the Terran Defiance turned toward Earth, Derek allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Devourers were defeated, the Council had learned to think for themselves, and somewhere in the galaxy, there were probably military historians trying to figure out how a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel had revolutionized galactic warfare. The answer, of course, was simple. Humans had never learned to fight fair, and it turned out that was exactly what the galaxy needed. Sometimes, Derek mused as the stars wheeled past the viewport, the best lessons are the ones you never intended to teach. Admiral Zix Taral of the Galactic Confederation leaned forward in his command chair, his four eyes narrowing as the holographic display showed yet another human diplomatic mission making its way toward their territory. His crystalline exoskeleton caught the light from the bridge's ambient illumination, casting prismatic reflections across the polished surfaces of the command center. They're coming, again. He didn't bother hiding the exasperation in his voice. His second-in-command, Fleet Commander Vos Pelter, stepped closer to the display. Sir, this is the fourth human delegation this stellar cycle. What could they possibly want now? What do they always want? Zix Taral waved a limb dismissively. To open dialogue, to establish cultural exchange, to promote interspecies understanding. The horror, Vos Peltar muttered, mandibles twitching slightly with what passed for amusement among their species. The Admiral's exoskeleton clicked softly as he shifted in his seat. You laugh, Commander, but you haven't been to one of these diplomatic functions. He practically hissed the last words. You haven't experienced it firsthand. Vos Peltar's antenna straightened with curiosity. Experienced what, sir? Zix Taral turned all four eyes toward his second-in-command. The human capacity for small talk. Dr. Ethan Miller had been prepping for this mission for months. As the lead xenoanthropologist for the United Earth Alliance, he'd studied the Vextari Confederation extensively. Their biology, their social structures, their peculiar aversion to human diplomatic efforts. He'd even learned enough of their click-hiss language to fumble through basic greetings without offending anyone too badly. What he couldn't figure out was why the Vextari kept rejecting Earth's attempts at formal diplomatic relations. The UEA had established peaceful ties with 17 other spacefaring civilizations, from the methane-breathing Jovari to the hive-minded Kulath, but the Vextari remained stubbornly aloof. Final approach to Vextari Station Orbex 7, announced Captain Lionel Reynolds from the cockpit of the diplomatic vessel Handshake. Everyone remember the briefing? No sudden movements, no showing teeth when you smile, And for God's sake, nobody offer them any food or drink unless they specifically ask. Ethan nodded, adjusting the collar of his formal diplomatic uniform. The last mission had apparently gone south when a well-meaning cultural attaché had offered the Vextari delegation a plate of assorted earth cheeses. They still weren't entirely sure what cultural taboo had been violated, but 3 Vextari had immediately retreated to their private chambers and refused to emerge for the remainder of the visit. This time will be different, Ethan muttered to himself as he felt the subtle shift in the ship's engines that indicated they were docking. This time we'll finally figure out what's been going wrong. Captain Reynolds' voice came over the intercom again. Docking complete. Pressures equalized. Delegation members to the airlock, please. Ethan joined the small group gathering by the airlock. Besides himself, there was Ambassador Diane Wright, a veteran diplomat with a reputation for handling difficult negotiations, Lieutenant Commander Gabriel Torres, security chief, and Dr. Olivia Lee, xenobiologist, who was there to observe Vextari physical responses and hopefully catch any nonverbal cues the rest of them might miss. Ambassador Wright addressed the team one last time before the door opened. Remember, people, patience and respect. We're guests here. The airlock cycled open with a soft hiss, revealing a group of 4 Vextari officials waiting in the reception area. Their crystalline exoskeletons gleamed under the station's lights, faceted surfaces reflecting a kaleidoscope of colors. The tallest one, clearly the leader, stepped forward. Greetings, humans of Earth, it said, its translator device rendering the series of clicks and hisses into smooth English. I am Station Commander Peldorax. Welcome to Orbex 7. Ambassador Wright stepped forward, hands carefully folded in front of her in the posture they'd been told signified peaceful intentions to the Vextari. Thank you for receiving us, Commander Peldorax. I am Ambassador Diane Wright of the United Earth Alliance. We are honored by your hospitality. The Vextari commander's upper limbs twitched slightly. Yes, hospitality, of course. There was a pause, and then, please follow me to the designated meeting area. As they walked through the gleaming corridors of the station, Ethan noticed the Vextari personnel they passed seemed to be giving them an unusually wide berth. Some even ducked into side corridors when they saw the human delegation approaching. Is it just me? He whispered to Dr. Lee. Or do they seem afraid of us? She nodded slightly, definitely exhibiting avoidance behaviors. But what could they possibly be afraid of? We're following all the protocols. When they reached the meeting room, a spacious chamber with a large oval table surrounded by seating accommodations designed for both human and Vextari physiologies, Commander Peldorax gestured for them to take their places. Admiral Zixtaral will join us shortly, the commander announced. He wishes to personally oversee these discussions. Ambassador Wright raised an eyebrow slightly. This was unexpected. The admiral of the Vextari fleet rarely involved himself in preliminary diplomatic meetings. We look forward to meeting the admiral, she said smoothly. There was an awkward silence. The Vextari officials stood motionless, their faceted eyes fixed on the humans. The humans sat politely, waiting for their host to initiate further conversation. After nearly a full minute of this, Ethan decided to break the ice. The station is quite impressive, he said conversationally. How long has Orbex 7 been operational? All 4 Vextari stiffened simultaneously, their crystalline exoskeletons making a distinct tinkling sound. Approximately 73 of your Earth years, Commander Peldorax replied stiffly. Fascinating, Ethan continued, not noticing the warning glance Ambassador Wright was giving him. The architectural design is remarkable. Does it serve primarily as a diplomatic hub, or does it have other functions as well? The Vextari exchanged glances with each other, a series of rapid clicks passing between them that the translators didn't pick up. It has multiple functions, Peldorax said slowly. Oh? What kinds of... Ambassador Wright cleared her throat loudly. Dr. Miller, perhaps we should wait for Admiral Zixtaral before we get into detailed discussions. But Ethan was genuinely curious, and he'd always found that showing interest in another culture was the best way to establish rapport. I'm just making conversation, he said with a smile, carefully keeping his lips closed to avoid showing teeth. The atmospheric composition in here is perfectly calibrated for both our species. Was that difficult to achieve? One of the other Vextari officials, a smaller individual with a slightly greenish tint to its exoskeleton, made a sound that might have been a groan. It has begun, this official whispered, just loud enough for the translators to pick it up. Before Ethan could ask what that meant, the door slid open and a new Vextari entered. This one was larger than the others, its exoskeleton a deep blue with streaks of silver running through it. 4 eyes surveyed the room imperiously. Admiral Zixtaral, Commander Peldorax announced. all four limbs dropping into what Ethan recognized as a salute. The human delegation has arrived. The Admiral approached the table slowly, each step deliberate. So I see. His translator rendered his voice as deep and resonant. Ambassador Wright, we meet again. Ambassador Wright inclined her head respectfully. Admiral, thank you for taking the time to join us. I believe we made some progress in our last meeting, and I'm hopeful that today we can... You believe we made progress? The Admiral's tone was incredulous. Ambassador, your last delegation spent 4 hours asking my officials about their personal lives, their favorite recreational activities, and whether they had observed the unusual stellar phenomenon in the neighboring system, which, I might add, was not even visible from this station. Wright looked taken aback. Admiral, I apologize if there was some misunderstanding. It's customary among humans to engage in casual conversation before... Yes, the Admiral interrupted, waving a limb dismissively. Your infamous small talk, we are well aware. Ethan leaned forward, his xenoanthropologist instincts suddenly on high alert. Admiral, if I may, are you suggesting that our attempts at casual conversation have been problematic in some way? All four of the Admiral's eyes swiveled to focus on Ethan. Problematic? Dr. Miller, is it not? Let me be clear. Your species' obsession with filling every moment of silence with meaningless verbal exchanges is not merely problematic. It is terrifying. The meeting room fell into a stunned silence, the kind that humans apparently found so intolerable that they needed to fill it with inane observations about station architecture and atmospheric composition. Ethan blinked rapidly, trying to process what he'd just heard. Terrifying, Admiral, I'm not sure I understand. Admiral Zix Taral settled his considerable bulk into a seat designed for his species, the crystalline segments of his exoskeleton adjusting to the contours of the chair with soft clicking sounds. Of course you don't understand, he said, his translator giving his words a weary inflection. Your species has never encountered another intelligent life form that doesn't constantly prattle on about nothing. Ambassador Wright cleared her throat. Admiral, I think there's been a serious cultural misunderstanding. What humans call small talk is simply our way of establishing social connections before engaging in more substantive discussions. We are aware of its purported function, the Admiral replied. What baffles us is your species' apparent inability to tolerate silence. Your neurological need to produce sounds even when you have nothing of importance to communicate. Dr. Lee leaned forward, her xenobiologist's curiosity piqued. Admiral, are you saying that the Vextari consider small talk to be... inappropriate? The smaller Vextari with the greenish tint let out a series of rapid clicks that the translator didn't catch. The Admiral's upper limbs twitched in what might have been annoyance. Inappropriate, no, Dr. Lee. We consider it a form of psychological warfare. Captain Reynolds, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the human delegation, suddenly choked on the water he'd been drinking. I beg your pardon? The Admiral's crystalline body shifted, casting prismatic reflections across the table. In our culture, speech is reserved for the communication of necessary information. To speak without purpose, to demand another's attention for trivial matters, is considered a hostile act, a dominance display. Ethan's mind was racing. This explains so much about their failed diplomatic efforts. So when we were asking about personal interests and making observations about stellar phenomena, you were asserting dominance, the Admiral confirmed, forcing us to process and respond to information of no strategic or practical value. It is intensely uncomfortable. Ambassador Wright looked mortified. Admiral, I assure you that was never our intention. In human culture, showing interest in others is a sign of respect and friendliness. So we have been told, the Admiral replied dryly. Yet knowing this has not made the experience any less excruciating. Ethan couldn't help himself. But surely other species you've encountered engage in some form of social bonding through conversation. The Admiral's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Dr. Miller, the Vextari Confederation has diplomatic relations with 27 spacefaring civilizations. None of them, not one, feels the need to comment on the architecture of our stations, inquire about our personal routines, or observe that the temperature of the room is agreeable. Commander Peldorax's translator emitted what sounded suspiciously like a suppressed laugh, quickly covered by a burst of static. In fact, the Admiral continued, the unique human capacity for sustained, content-free vocalization has become something of a legend among Confederation species. Some refuse to believe the reports until they experience it firsthand. Ethan exchanged glances with Dr. Lee. This was unprecedented. All their preparation, all their careful study of Vextari customs, and they'd completely missed the most basic cultural incompatibility. Admiral, Ambassador Wright said carefully. If direct communication without preamble is preferred, then we are happy to adapt to your cultural norms. We can proceed directly to the substantive issues we came to discuss. The Admiral's posture seemed to relax slightly, his exoskeleton shifting to a less rigid configuration. That would be appreciated, Ambassador. Excellent. Then let us begin with the proposed trade agreement regarding rare earth minerals and crystalline computing technology. The meeting proceeded much more smoothly after that. The humans made a concerted effort to speak only when they had something relevant to say, and the Vextari gradually became more engaged in the discussion. By the end of the scheduled session, they had made more progress than in all their previous encounters combined. As they prepared to conclude, Admiral Zix Toral addressed them directly. Humans, you have demonstrated an unexpected capacity for adaptation today. This is promising. Ambassador Wright inclined her head. Thank you, Admiral. We value this opportunity to better understand your cultural preferences. Indeed. The Admiral's four eyes focused on Ethan. Dr. Miller, as a xenoanthropologist, perhaps you can enlighten us on something that has puzzled our researchers. Ethan straightened in his chair. I'll certainly try, Admiral. Why? The single word hung in the air. I'm sorry? Why does your species engage in this behavior? What evolutionary advantage could possibly be conferred by the compulsion to vocalize when there is no information to be conveyed? It was a fascinating question, one that Ethan had never really considered. Humans just talked. It was what they did. I'm not sure I have a definitive answer, Admiral, he admitted. But if I were to speculate, perhaps it's related to social bonding. Humans are highly social primates. Our ancestors lived in groups where social cohesion was essential for survival. Verbal grooming, you might call it, maintaining social connections through regular, low-stakes interaction. The Admiral's exoskeleton clicked softly as he considered this. Fascinating, and yet deeply unsettling. Unsettling? Dr. Lee asked. Indeed. The Admiral's translator gave his voice a thoughtful quality. Do you know what truly terrifies us about humans, Dr. Lee? Not your surprising adaptability, not your curious biology, not even your alarming tendency to solve problems through what you euphemistically call creative improvisation. What then? She asked. Your ability, no, your need, to forge connections with anything that crosses your path. The Admiral's four eyes blinked in sequence again. You've been in our space for less than a century, and already you have treaties, trade agreements, and cultural exchange programs with 17 different species. Species that had previously shown no interest in interstellar diplomacy. Species that, in some cases, had been actively hostile to each other for millennia. Ambassador Wright frowned slightly. I'm not sure I understand the concern, Admiral. Peaceful cooperation benefits everyone. Does it? The Admiral leaned forward. Or does it benefit humans? Your species' compulsion to connect, this small talk that you inflict on unsuspecting species. It is merely the first stage of a process we have observed with growing alarm. You start with meaningless chatter. Then come trade agreements, cultural exchanges, scientific cooperation, military alliances. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Admiral, are you suggesting that you see our diplomatic efforts as some kind of infiltration? The Vextari do not suggest, Dr. Miller. We observe patterns and draw logical conclusions. The Admiral's exoskeleton shifted, casting different prismatic patterns across the table. In less than a human lifetime, your species has transformed the political landscape of this quadrant of the galaxy. Species that never communicated now engage in regular commerce. Ancient enemies now cooperate on joint ventures. And at the center of this web of newfound friendship sits Earth. Captain Reynolds leaned forward, his expression stern. With all due respect, Admiral, you're making it sound like we're implementing some kind of sinister plot. We're just trying to get along with our galactic neighbors. Perhaps that is how you perceive it, Captain, the Admiral replied. But consider this. What happens to a species' unique cultural identity when it begins adopting human customs? When it starts engaging in small talk and social gatherings and team-building exercises? There was a long pause as the humans considered this. Finally, Ambassador Wright spoke. Admiral, I assure you the United Earth Alliance has the utmost respect for the cultural autonomy of all spacefaring civilizations. If our diplomatic approach has seemed invasive, then we sincerely apologize and will adjust accordingly. The Admiral studied her for a moment, all four eyes unblinking. Your apology is noted, Ambassador. And your willingness to adapt your communication style today has been informative. Perhaps there is hope for productive relations between our peoples after all, provided you can restrain your species' pathological need to comment on the aesthetics of our architecture. Was that Was the Admiral making a joke? Ethan wasn't entirely sure, but he thought he detected something like humor in the way the Vextari's upper limbs twitched. As the meeting concluded and the human delegation prepared to return to their ship, Ethan found himself walking alongside Commander Peldorax. "Commander," he said, careful to keep his speech purposeful, "I have a question of scientific relevance, if you're willing." The commander's translator emitted a sound that might have been a sigh. "You may proceed, Dr. Miller. How do Vextari form social bonds, if not through casual conversation?" Peldorax was silent for several steps. Just as Ethan was beginning to think he'd committed another cultural faux pas, the commander replied, "We share silence, Dr. Miller." "Share silence?" "Yes. To be in another's presence without requiring their attention or energy. This is how we demonstrate trust and respect." The commander's faceted eyes turned toward him. "The capacity to be comfortable in silence is, to us, the mark of a truly advanced intelligence." Ethan nodded slowly, a new understanding dawning. "That's actually quite beautiful, Commander." They walked the rest of the way to the airlock in silence, and for perhaps the first time in his life, Ethan didn't feel the need to fill it. Back on the handshake, the human delegation gathered in the conference room to debrief. "Well," Ambassador Wright said, "that was enlightening." Captain Reynolds snorted. "That's one word for it. So all this time, we've been unintentionally threatening them with our friendly banter. No wonder they've been avoiding us." Dr. Lee was scrolling through data on her tablet. "It makes perfect sense from an evolutionary standpoint. The Vextari evolved from solitary hunters that used sound primarily for warning signals and mating calls. Their social structures developed much later in their evolutionary history, and by then, they'd already established complex nonverbal communication systems." Ethan nodded, his mind still processing everything he'd learned. "And we've been charging in like typical humans, talking about the weather and asking about their families. From their perspective, we might as well have been challenging them to combat." Ambassador Wright rubbed her temples. "The question is, where do we go from here?" The Admiral seemed more receptive by the end of our meeting, but it's clear that our usual diplomatic playbook isn't going to work with the Vextari. "We adapt," Ethan said simply. "We learn to be comfortable with silence. We communicate only when we have something substantive to say. It's not impossible, just different." Captain Reynolds leaned back in his chair. "And what about the Admiral's other concern? This idea that we're somehow homogenizing galactic culture, turning everyone into humans?" There was a thoughtful silence, one that, Ethan noted with some amusement, they all seemed a bit more comfortable with than they would have been before this meeting. "I think," Ambassador Wright said finally, "that we need to be more mindful of how our approach to diplomacy might be perceived by others. The Vextari aren't wrong. Humanity has been remarkably successful at building alliances in a very short time. Maybe too successful." Dr. Lee looked up from her tablet. "It's not just about diplomacy. Think about cultural exchange, entertainment, social media. Human forms of expression are spreading throughout known space at an unprecedented rate." "Is that really such a bad thing?" Captain Reynolds asked. "Cultural exchange goes both ways. We've adopted plenty of alien concepts and technologies." "True," Ethan acknowledged. "But there's an asymmetry to it. Humans seem uniquely absorptive, for lack of a better term. We take in elements of other cultures and integrate them into our own, but in the process, we transform them into something recognizably human." Ambassador Wright nodded slowly. "The Admiral's concern about cultural identity isn't entirely unfounded. We need to be careful not to overwhelm the unique perspectives of other species with our very human way of doing things." "So what's the solution?" Captain Reynolds asked. "Start being worse at diplomacy?" That earned a laugh from everyone. "No," Ethan said. "But maybe we need to approach it differently. Less about bringing others into our way of doing things, and more about finding unique ways to connect with each species on their own terms." Ambassador Wright nodded. "Precisely. And I think today was a good start with the Vextari. We showed them that we can adapt, that we're willing to meet them where they are. And where they are is a place of really uncomfortable silences," Captain Reynolds muttered. Dr. Lee smiled. "Think of it as an opportunity to develop a new skill, Captain, the art of saying nothing. Hardest thing in the world for a human," he replied with a grin. Ethan found himself thinking about what Commander Peldorax had said. "We share silence." There was something profound in that concept. Something that humans, with their constant chatter and need for connection, might actually benefit from learning. As the debriefing concluded, and the team dispersed to prepare for their departure, Ethan made his way to his quarters. He had a report to write, one that would potentially reshape humanity's approach to interstellar diplomacy. But first he decided to practice a little Vextari cultural exchange. He sat in his chair, closed his eyes, and attempted to simply exist in the silence. He lasted exactly 47 seconds before he started humming. Baby steps. 3 months later, Ethan found himself back on Orbex 7, but under very different circumstances. This time, he wasn't part of a formal diplomatic delegation. He was there as a cultural consultant, invited by Commander Peldorax himself, to assist with preparations for the first-ever Vextari Human Joint Scientific Congress. The delegates will be arriving within the next solar cycle, Peldorax explained as they walked through the section of the station being readied for the event. 17 human scientists and 23 Vextari researchers. Ethan nodded, taking note of the modifications being made to accommodate both species. And they'll be working together for 2 full weeks? Yes. The Admiral believes this experiment will determine whether meaningful collaboration is possible between our species. The commander's faceted eyes turned toward him. Your insights have been valuable, Dr. Miller. The cultural orientation materials you provided have helped prepare our scientists for human interaction patterns. I'm glad to hear it, Ethan said, feeling a surge of professional pride. The comprehensive guide he'd developed, Understanding Human Communication, a survival guide for non-human species, had apparently been distributed throughout the Confederation. They reached a large chamber that had been converted into what looked like a combination laboratory and conference space. Workstations were arranged in clusters, each designed to accommodate the physiological needs of both species. This is impressive, Ethan commented, genuinely impressed by the thought that had gone into the space. We have included what you call break areas here and here, Peldorax indicated with a limb gesture. Places where humans can engage in their small talk without disrupting the work environment. Ethan smiled slightly. And the Vextari, where will they go when they need a break? We do not take breaks in the way humans do, the commander replied. But we have designated quiet spaces where one may process information without interruption. As they continued their tour, Ethan noticed something interesting. Commander Peldorax, who had been so stiff and formal during their first meeting, now seemed almost relaxed in his presence. Their conversation flowed more naturally, with periods of comfortable silence interspersed with purposeful exchange of information. Commander, Ethan said during one such moment of quiet, may I make a personal observation? The Vextari's crystalline body shifted slightly, catching the light. You may. You seem more comfortable with me than during our previous interactions. Has something changed? Peldorax was silent for a moment, his 4 eyes blinking in that characteristic sequential pattern. I have been studying human communication patterns, Dr. Miller, as have many in the Confederation. Studying us? Why? The Admiral's concerns about human influence are not unfounded, but they may be incomplete. The commander's translator gave his voice a thoughtful quality. Your species' compulsion to connect, while initially alarming to us, has proven remarkably effective in facilitating cooperation throughout this sector of space. They had reached a viewport that looked out over the curve of the planet below. Peldorax paused, his faceted eyes reflecting the swirling blues and greens of the world's atmosphere. The Vextari have existed as a spacefaring civilization for over 2,000 of your years, Dr. Miller. In that time, we have built an efficient, logical, ordered society. We have developed technologies that have allowed us to colonize 17 worlds. We have established diplomatic relations with numerous species. That's impressive, Ethan said, and meant it. Perhaps. But in the less than 1 century since humans achieved faster-than-light travel, your species has catalyzed more interspecies cooperation than the Confederation has managed in 2 millennia. The commander's upper limbs twitched in a gesture Ethan had come to recognize as indicating thoughtful consideration. This has prompted re-evaluation. Ethan leaned against the railing in front of the viewport, studying the Vextari's crystalline features. Re-evaluation of what exactly? Of whether the human compulsion for connection might be not merely a curious evolutionary anomaly, but potentially advantageous. Now that was interesting. You're saying the Vextari are considering adopting human communication styles? Not precisely. Our neurological structures are not configured for the kind of constant social reinforcement that humans require. Peldorax's exoskeleton clicked softly as he shifted position. But we are exploring the possibility that there might be value in certain aspects of human interaction, such as your species' ability to establish trust quickly through what you call rapport building, your facility for identifying non-obvious connections between disparate concepts, your tendency to share information freely, even when there is no immediate practical benefit to doing so. Ethan nodded slowly. These were all characteristics that humans took for granted, but that apparently seemed quite foreign to the Vextari. "So this scientific congress," he said, "it's not just about the stated research objectives. It's also an experiment in cross-species communication? All diplomatic interactions are experiments, Dr. Miller." The commander's translator rendered his tone as matter of fact. "But yes, the Admiral is particularly interested in observing whether Vextari researchers can adapt to human communication styles, and vice versa, without compromising the integrity of the scientific work." Ethan couldn't help but smile. "Commander, I think you might be more similar to humans than you realize. That kind of adaptive curiosity is very, well, human." Peldorax's exoskeleton made a sound that Ethan had never heard before, a sort of crystalline chime that the translator didn't interpret. "I am uncertain whether to receive that as a compliment or an insult, Dr. Miller." Ethan laughed. "Definitely a compliment. And the fact that you're even considering it might be a compliment shows just how far we've come in understanding each other." The commander's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "Indeed. Which brings me to the primary reason I asked you to join me today." "Oh?" "The Admiral has authorized me to offer you a position as the first human cultural attaché to be permanently stationed on Orbex 7. Ethan stared at the Vextari, momentarily speechless. "You want me to live here? Among the Vextari?" "If you are amenable, yes. Your understanding of both human and Vextari communication patterns makes you uniquely qualified to facilitate ongoing interactions between our species." It was a stunning offer and an unprecedented opportunity. No human had ever been invited to take up permanent residence in Vextari space. "I'm honored, Commander. Truly. But I have to ask, why the change of heart?" "The last time I was here, the Admiral was practically accusing humans of cultural imperialism." Peldorax's crystalline body shifted, casting prismatic reflections across the viewport. "The Admiral's concerns were not unfounded, Dr. Miller, but they were perhaps unbalanced. The Confederation Council has determined that the potential benefits of closer cooperation with humans outweigh the risks. And those benefits are numerous. But perhaps most significantly, your species' unique approach to problem solving. Humans appear to excel at making intuitive leaps that our more structured logical processes do not facilitate." Ethan smiled slightly. "You mean we're good at thinking outside the box?" The commander's translator emitted a sound that might have been a sigh. "That is precisely the kind of idiom that makes communication with humans so challenging, Dr. Miller. But yes, your metaphorical conceptualization aptly describes the phenomenon." "Well, I'm flattered by the offer, Commander. I'll need to consult with my superiors at the UEA, but speaking personally, I would be very interested in accepting the position." "Excellent. The Admiral will be pleased." As they continued their tour of the station, Ethan found himself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought him here. What had begun as a puzzling diplomatic impasse had evolved into a fascinating opportunity for genuine cross-cultural understanding. The Vextari had initially been terrified by humanity's incessant need for social connection, but now they were cautiously exploring whether that very trait might have something valuable to offer their own civilization. It was, Ethan thought, a perfect example of why he had become a xenoanthropologist in the first place. Not just to study alien cultures, but to find those points of intersection where different species could learn from each other, grow together, and perhaps build something greater than either could achieve alone, even if it meant learning to be comfortable with silence. The inaugural Vextari Human Joint Scientific Congress was, by any objective measure, a qualified success. There had been moments of tension, cultural misunderstandings, and one particularly memorable incident involving a human physicist's attempt to explain a complex theoretical model through interpretive dance. But overall, meaningful scientific collaboration had occurred, and both sides had emerged with new insights, not just into the research topics, but into each other. 6 months later, Ethan found himself sitting in what had become his regular spot in the observation dome of Orbex 7, watching the swirling atmospheric patterns of the planet below. He had settled into his role as cultural attaché with surprising ease, establishing a routine that balanced his official duties with personal research and the ongoing process of adapting to life among the Vextari. He was deep in thought, reviewing his notes for an upcoming presentation to the Confederation Council, when he became aware of a presence beside him. "Admiral," he said, looking up to find Zixtaral's imposing crystalline form looming over him. "This is an unexpected honor." The Admiral's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "Dr. Miller, may I join you?" "Of course." Ethan gestured to the space beside him. The Admiral settled his considerable bulk onto the specially reinforced seating platform with a series of soft clicks and chimes. For several minutes they sat in silence, watching the play of light on the planet's cloud formations. Finally, the Admiral spoke. "The Council has reviewed your proposal for the expanded cultural exchange program." Ethan tensed slightly. He had worked on that proposal for weeks, carefully balancing the interests of both species. "And? It has been approved, with certain modifications." Relief washed over him. "That's excellent news, Admiral. May I ask what modifications were required?" "The Council felt that your timeline was overly ambitious. The introduction of human literature and entertainment into Vextari educational curricula will be phased in more gradually than you suggested." Ethan nodded. "That's a reasonable adjustment. Cultural integration should proceed at a pace that's comfortable for both sides." Indeed. The Admiral's exoskeleton shifted, casting prismatic patterns across the floor. "There is another matter I wish to discuss with you." "I'm listening." "The human delegation that arrived yesterday. The entertainment specialists." Ethan suppressed a smile. The entertainment specialists were actually a touring human theater company, brought to Orbex 7 as part of the cultural exchange program. Their mission, to perform a selection of Earth's classical and contemporary plays for a Vextari audience. "Is there a problem with the performance schedule?" he asked. "No, the issue is more fundamental." The Admiral's 4 eyes focused on him intently. "They wish to perform something called improvisational comedy." Ethan bit the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. "Ah, I see. Do you?" "Because I do not." The Admiral's translator gave his voice an unusually agitated quality. "They have explained the concept, and it seems to involve speaking without knowing what one is going to say beforehand." "That's a fairly accurate description, yes." "Dr. Miller." The Admiral's upper limbs twitched in what Ethan had come to recognize as a gesture of extreme discomfort. "You must understand that the very concept is profoundly disturbing to the Vextari mind. Speech without purpose? Words generated spontaneously for the sole purpose of provoking an emotional response? It is unsettling." Ethan considered this carefully. He had made significant progress in helping the Vextari understand human communication patterns. But improv comedy might indeed be a bridge too far at this stage. "I understand your concern, Admiral. I'll speak with the theater company and suggest they stick to scripted performances for now." The Admiral's posture relaxed slightly. "That would be appreciated." They fell into silence again, but there was something different about it this time. A tension that hadn't been there before. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Admiral, may I ask you a personal question?" "You may ask, I may choose not to answer." "Fair enough. In the 6 months I've been stationed here, I've observed a significant shift in the Vextari attitude toward humans. Not just officially, but on an individual level. People who once avoided me in the corridors now stop to exchange information. Some even engage in what I might call casual conversation." "Your observation is accurate," the Admiral acknowledged. "And your question? What changed? What made the Vextari decide that humanity's terrifying communication style might be worth adopting, at least in part?" The Admiral was silent for so long that Ethan began to think he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his translator gave his voice a contemplative quality. "Have you studied the history of the Galactic Confederation, Dr. Miller?" "Some aspects of it, yes." "Then you may be aware that in the 2,000 years of our existence as a spacefaring civilization, the Confederation has experienced 3 major conflicts with other advanced species." Ethan nodded. "The Hive Wars, the Quantum Schism, and the Void Incursion." "Correct. And do you know what these conflicts had in common?" Ethan considered this. They were all with non-Confederation species, obviously. All were eventually resolved through a combination of military action and diplomacy. Beyond that, I'm not sure. They were all with species that, like the Vextari, evolved from solitary predators. The Admiral's 4 eyes focused on the planet below. Species that, like us, developed communication primarily as a tool for transmitting necessary information. Species that, like us, found the concept of speech for connection alien and unsettling. Ethan leaned forward, fascinated. "Are you suggesting that these conflicts were, at their root, communication failures?" "Not precisely. But our analysis suggests that they were exacerbated by an inability to establish what humans would call rapport. Each side perceived the other's communication style as hostile or deceptive, creating a spiral of misunderstanding that ultimately led to conflict. And you think humanity's style of communication might have prevented these conflicts?" "That is a significant oversimplification, Dr. Miller. But there is evidence to suggest that species with strong social bonding behaviors, particularly those that engage in regular non-essential communication, have a lower incidence of interspecies conflict." Ethan sat back, processing this. So the Vextari interest in human communication patterns is strategic as well as scientific, yes. The Admiral's crystalline body shifted slightly. The Confederation Council has determined that in an expanding interstellar community, the ability to establish non-threatening connections with diverse species may be essential for long-term security. And humans just happen to be really good at that. Disturbingly so, yes. There was something in the Admiral's tone that might have been dry humor. Your species seems pathologically determined to befriend everything it encounters, regardless of physiological, psychological, or cultural differences. Ethan couldn't help but laugh. I suppose we do have a tendency to anthropomorphize, to look for connections, even where they might not naturally exist. Indeed, it is simultaneously your most baffling trait and potentially your most valuable contribution to galactic civilization. Coming from a Vextari, especially one as high-ranking as Admiral Zix-Taral, this was extraordinary praise. Thank you, Admiral, I think. The Admiral's upper limbs performed a gesture that Ethan had learned indicated acknowledgement. You have played a significant role in facilitating this adaptation. Dr. Miller, the Council has taken note of your contributions. Before Ethan could respond to this unexpected commendation, the Admiral rose. I must return to my duties. The modifications to your proposal will be transmitted to your terminal by the end of this cycle. Admiral, Ethan said, also standing. Before you go, may I ask one more question? Proceed. The improv comedy troupe. Are you planning to attend their performance? The scripted one, I mean. All four of the Admiral's eyes blinked simultaneously. A rare expression that Ethan had learned indicated surprise or strong emotion. I had not intended to do so. Such entertainment serves no practical function. With all due respect, Admiral, that's rather the point. It's an opportunity to experience a fundamental aspect of human culture. Our use of storytelling and performance not just to transmit information, but to create shared emotional experiences. The Admiral was silent for a moment, his crystalline exoskeleton catching the light from the planet below. You believe this would be valuable to my understanding of human communication patterns? I do, Ethan said firmly, and if I may be so bold, it might also demonstrate to the Vextari population that their Admiral is personally committed to this cultural exchange initiative. Another long silence. Then, a logical point. Very well, Dr. Miller. I will attend this performance. Excellent. I think you'll find it informative. As the Admiral departed with his characteristic deliberate stride, Ethan allowed himself a small smile. 6 months ago, the idea of the imposing Vextari military leader attending a human theatrical performance would have seemed absurd. Now it was just another step in the ongoing process of building understanding between their species. Small talk, it seemed, had its uses after all. The Galactic Confederation's annual security summit was held on a neutral space station at the intersection of 3 major civilizations' territories. As Earth's newly appointed ambassador to the Confederation, Diane Wright found herself navigating a complex web of interspecies politics, ancient alliances, and emerging tensions. This summit was particularly significant, as it was the first to include human representatives as full participants rather than observers. The United Earth Alliance had been granted provisional membership in the Confederation just 3 months earlier, a development that had sent shockwaves through galactic political circles. Ambassador Wright stood at the entrance to the main conference chamber, mentally reviewing her briefing materials. The chamber was already filling with representatives from 24 spacefaring civilizations, their diverse physiologies accommodated by a variety of specialized seating arrangements and atmospheric bubbles. Ambassador Wright. She turned to find Admiral Zix-Taral approaching, his crystalline form instantly recognizable among the diverse array of species. Admiral, she greeted him with a respectful nod. It's good to see you again. Indeed. The summit promises to be eventful. The Admiral's translator gave his voice a dry quality that Wright had come to recognize as his version of humor. That's one way to put it, she replied with a small smile. I understand there's significant opposition to the motion for increased patrol coordination in the Orion Spur. The Tellurian Collective has always preferred isolation to cooperation, the Admiral acknowledged, but recent developments may force them to reconsider their position. As they entered the chamber together, Wright couldn't help but marvel at how far human-Vextari relations had come in the year since that pivotal meeting on Orbex 7. What had begun as a profound cultural misunderstanding had evolved into one of Earth's strongest interstellar alliances. They found their designated places at the circular conference table. Each delegation had a section equipped with communication terminals and translation devices. The human contingent included not only Ambassador Wright, but also Captain Reynolds, now Admiral Reynolds, as military liaison, and Dr. Lee as scientific advisor. As the various representatives settled into their positions, Wright noticed a ripple of what appeared to be tension spreading through the chamber. Whispered conversations and the equivalent of concerned glances were being exchanged among several delegations. "Something's wrong," she murmured to Admiral Reynolds. Before he could respond, the session was called to order by the Confederation moderator, a member of the ancient Quiloth species, whose hive mind was particularly suited to impartial oversight of complex negotiations. "Representatives of the Galactic Confederation," the moderator began, its melodious multi-toned voice resonating through the chamber. "We gather at a time of unprecedented challenge. Before we proceed with the scheduled agenda, we must address an urgent matter that has arisen within the past solar cycle." A murmur ran through the assembly. "Our long-range monitoring stations have detected a signal from the outer reaches of charted space," the moderator continued. "The signal bears the characteristics of a technologically advanced civilization, one previously unknown to the Confederation." Wright exchanged glances with her team. First contact with a new spacefaring species was rare enough to be significant news, but hardly cause for the level of concern she was sensing in the chamber. "The nature of this signal," the moderator went on, "has been determined to be problematic." With a gesture of its appendages, the moderator activated the central holographic display. A complex waveform appeared, pulsing with shifting patterns of light. Dr. Lee leaned forward, her scientific curiosity engaged. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "But what makes it problematic?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Admiral Zix Taral rose from his position, his crystalline form catching the light from the holographic display. "The signal contains no decipherable information," he announced, his translator giving his voice an unusually grave tone. "It is, as far as our analysts can determine, communication without purpose." Wright felt a chill run down her spine as understanding dawned. To the Vextari, and apparently to many other Confederation species, purposeless communication was a deeply unsettling concept. "Are we certain it's artificial?" she asked, rising to address the assembly. "Could it be a natural phenomenon?" The moderator's sensory appendages rippled in a gesture of negation. "The pattern contains too many complex regularities to be natural, yet lacks the information density of conventional communication. It appears to be purely aesthetic in nature." "A greeting," Dr. Lee suggested. "Perhaps a form of art or music intended to establish initial contact." This suggestion was met with various expressions of discomfort from around the table. A representative of the insectoid Z-Crix collective vibrated its wing cases in what the translators rendered as alarm. "If this is indeed their form of greeting," the Z-Crix representative chittered, "it suggests a species with communication patterns dangerously similar to those of humans." There was a moment of awkward silence as all attention turned to the Earth delegation. Admiral Reynolds cleared his throat. "I'm not sure whether to be flattered or offended by that assessment," he said dryly. This broke the tension somewhat, earning what passed for chuckles from several species. Ambassador Wright seized the moment. "Representatives of the Confederation, I understand your concerns. The concept of communication as an art form, of signals designed to evoke emotional responses rather than convey specific information, is indeed central to human culture. But I would suggest that this similarity might be advantageous in the current situation." The moderator's sensory appendages quivered with interest. "Please elaborate, Ambassador Wright." "If this unknown species does indeed share humans' approach to communication, then we may be uniquely positioned to establish meaningful contact with them." She gestured toward the pulsing waveform. "Where others see purposeless noise, we might be able to discern patterns of greeting, of artistic expression, of invitation to dialogue." A representative of the crystalline Lux Thalian sovereignty, distant cousins to the Vextari, chimed in with a resonant tone. "The human perspective may have merit in this specific context. Their unusual communication proclivities may serve as a bridge." Admiral Zix Taral's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he considered this. "The Confederation Council has indeed recognized the potential value of human communication strategies in certain diplomatic contexts. This may be such a case." The moderator's appendages rippled in what appeared to be thoughtful consideration. "What do you propose, Ambassador Wright?" Wright exchanged quick glances with her team before responding. "I propose that Earth lead the response to this signal, with input and oversight from the Confederation. We would craft a reply that incorporates both information-dense communication and elements of what humans would call cultural exchange, music, art, expressions of peaceful intent." There was a buzz of discussion around the table as representatives conferred with their delegations. The moderator allowed this to continue for several minutes before calling for order. The proposal has merit, it announced. However, the potential risks must be acknowledged. If this unknown species is indeed similar to humans in their communication patterns, they may also share humans' expansionist tendencies. Wright bristled slightly at this characterization, but kept her diplomatic composure. With respect, moderator, humanity's rapid integration into the galactic community has been peaceful and mutually beneficial. We seek connections, yes, but not conquest. A fair clarification, the moderator acknowledged. Nevertheless, caution is warranted when establishing contact with any previously unknown technological civilization. I propose the formation of a special committee to oversee this initiative, comprised of representatives from Earth, the Vextari Confederation, the Kulath Consensus, and the Tellurian Collective. This suggestion was met with general approval, though the representative of the isolationist Tellurians seemed less than enthusiastic about their inclusion. As the summit transitioned to discussing the practical details of this new initiative, Wright found herself approached by Admiral Zix during a brief recess. "A significant responsibility has been placed on your species, Ambassador," he said, his translator giving his voice a tone that might have been concern. "We're up to the challenge, Admiral," she assured him, "and I'm grateful for your support in there. It means a lot coming from you." The Admiral's crystalline form shifted slightly, casting prismatic patterns on the floor. "It was not support, Ambassador, merely recognition of logical possibilities. However," his four eyes blinked in sequence, "I have observed that when humans are given responsibility, they tend to exceed expectations in unpredictable ways." Wright smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment. As you wish." The Admiral paused, then added, "Dr. Miller's cultural exchange program has yielded unexpected benefits. The Vextari scientists who have adopted limited human communication patterns report increased efficiency in collaborative projects." "Really? That's fascinating." "I'd love to see the data. It will be provided." Another pause. "There is also the matter of the theatrical performances." Wright raised an eyebrow. She'd heard about the human theater company's tour of Vextari space, but hadn't received any official reports on its reception. "Oh? Were they well received?" "They were impactful. Particularly the performance of the work you call Hamlet." Wright blinked in surprise. "Hamlet? That's an unusual choice for first contact with a species that finds human emotion difficult to understand." "On the contrary, the protagonist's inability to act decisively despite possessing all necessary information was immediately comprehensible to the Vextari audience." The Admiral's upper limbs twitched in what might have been amusement. Many found it to be an insightful commentary on the paralysis that can result from excessive data processing. Wright couldn't help but laugh. "I'm not sure that's exactly what Shakespeare intended, but I'm glad it resonated." "Indeed. The concept of narrative as a means of exploring decision-making pathways has proven unexpectedly valuable." The Admiral's translator gave his voice a thoughtful quality. "It has prompted the Council to authorize an expansion of the cultural exchange program." "That's excellent news, Admiral." "Yes. Though I must insist that the concept of improvisational comedy remain restricted to human-only venues for the foreseeable future." Wright smiled. "I think we can accommodate that request." As they rejoined the main session, Wright found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought humanity to this point. A year ago, the Vextari had considered humans' need for social connection to be their most terrifying trait. Now that same trait had positioned Earth as a vital bridge between the established galactic community and a potentially revolutionary new contact. Small talk, it seemed, might just save the galaxy. The First Contact Response Team, officially designated Interspecies Communication Initiative Alpha, but quickly nicknamed the Greeting Committee by its human members, established its base of operations on a repurposed research station at the edge of Confederation space. From there, they could monitor the mysterious signal and broadcast their responses without requiring lengthy transit times for communications. Ethan Miller, whose work on human Vextari communication had made him something of a celebrity in xenoanthropological circles, was appointed to lead the human contingent of the team. Admiral Zix himself represented the Vextari, an unprecedented gesture that underscored the importance the Confederation placed on this mission. 3 months into the project, the team had made significant progress in analyzing the signal, now confirmed to be originating from a star system some 30 light-years beyond the Confederation's outermost monitoring stations. "It's definitely communication," Dr. Lee announced during one of their daily briefing sessions. She gestured to the complex visualization hovering above the conference table, but not in any format we're familiar with. "It's more like, well, like music, but with mathematical underpinnings that suggest deliberate information encoding. Similar to how humans might incorporate mathematical patterns into artistic expression? Asked Quillath coordinator Nisvral, the hive mind's designated focal point. Precisely, Lee confirmed, but much more complex. We're seeing patterns within patterns, rhythmic structures that seem to serve both aesthetic and informational purposes simultaneously. The Tellurian representative, a tall, willowy being with silver-blue skin and multifaceted eyes, made a gesture that the translators rendered as skeptical. This remains speculation. We cannot assume that concepts such as aesthetics and information are universally defined. True, Ethan acknowledged. But we're working with the evidence available to us. And that evidence increasingly suggests a species that doesn't make the same distinction between art and information that many Confederation species do. Admiral Zixtaral's crystalline form shifted slightly, catching the light from the holographic display. You are suggesting a fundamental similarity to human communication patterns. Yes and no, Ethan replied carefully. Humans often blend information and emotional content, true, but we still generally recognize them as distinct categories. This signal seems to integrate them more fully, in ways that even humans find challenging to parse. The Admiral's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Fascinating, and potentially concerning. I see it as an opportunity, Ethan countered. If this species has developed communication that transcends the information-emotion dichotomy, imagine what we might learn from them. The Kulath coordinator's appendages rippled in what appeared to be agreement. The potential for expansion of communicative capabilities is significant. However, the Tellurian concern regarding projection of our own conceptual frameworks is valid. The Tellurian representative inclined their head in acknowledgement. We maintain that caution is warranted. However, we recognize that the approach developed by Dr. Miller and his team represents our best chance of establishing meaningful contact. This was high praise indeed from the normally isolationist Tellurians, and Ethan felt a surge of pride in what their diverse team had accomplished. Over the past 3 months, they had crafted a response signal that incorporated elements from all Confederation species' communication styles, with a particular emphasis on the blend of information and expression that seemed to characterize the unknown civilization's approach. The response signal is ready for transmission, he reported. We've incorporated the refinements suggested by Admiral Zixtaral's analytical team, and the Quillath consensus has verified its logical consistency. The coordinator's appendages rippled in confirmation. The signal structure maintains coherence across all modalities, and the Tellurian cultural analysts have confirmed that no unintended threatening or territorial messages are inadvertently encoded, added their representative. Admiral Zixtaral's upper limbs performed a gesture that Ethan had learned indicated formal acknowledgement. Then we are prepared to proceed with transmission, unless there are any final concerns. There was a moment of silence around the table, not the uncomfortable silence that had once characterized human-Vextari interactions, but the comfortable quiet of a team that had learned to work together despite profound differences in communication styles. Very well, the Admiral said finally. Initiate transmission sequence. As the station's powerful communications array began broadcasting their carefully crafted response toward the distant star system, Ethan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. What had begun as a profound cultural misunderstanding between humans and Vextari had evolved into a partnership that now stood at the forefront of potentially the most significant first contact in galactic history. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. The response came far sooner than anyone had expected. Just 2 weeks after transmitting their greeting, the monitoring stations detected a new signal from the unknown civilization. This one clearly directed specifically at them rather than a general broadcast. The greeting committee gathered in the main conference room as the signal was processed through their translation matrices. Tension and excitement filled the air as they waited to see what the mysterious species had made of their carefully crafted message. Signal processing complete, announced the station's AI. Translation confidence, 37.8%. Not great, but better than they had hoped for a first exchange. Display primary content, Admiral Zixtaral ordered. The holographic display in the center of the conference table flickered to life, showing a swirling pattern of colors and shapes that pulsed and shifted in time with an accompanying series of musical tones. Embedded within this abstract display were occasional flashes of what appeared to be mathematical symbols, and fragmentary images of what might be the unknown species themselves, though the images were too brief and distorted to provide clear information about their physical form. They're responding in kind, Dr. Lee observed, her eyes fixed on the display, matching our communication style rather than imposing their own. The Kulath coordinator's appendages rippled with interest. a significant indicator of potential compatibility. They appear to value adaptive communication. As the message continued, patterns began to emerge from the seemingly chaotic display. Mathematical sequences that built upon those included in the Confederation's greeting. Visual motifs that echoed elements of the art and symbolism they had shared. They're not just responding, Ethan realized aloud. They're riffing on our message, taking our themes and developing them in new directions. The Tellurian representative's multifaceted eyes glittered as they studied the display. Improvisation within established parameters. Interesting. Ethan couldn't help but smile at the irony. Just like improv comedy, Admiral. They're saying yes and to our greeting. Admiral Zixtaral's crystalline form shifted slightly. An apt analogy, Dr. Miller. Though I maintain that improvisation remains a concerning form of communication. But you have to admit it's effective in this context, Ethan pointed out. They're showing us that they understand our message and are building on it creatively. That's a promising foundation for dialogue. The Admiral's four eyes blinked in sequence. Perhaps. As the message neared its conclusion, a new element appeared in the display. A series of geometric coordinates coupled with a time frame indicated in a mathematical notation that corresponded roughly to standard galactic measurements. They're proposing a meeting, the Quilath coordinator announced, its appendages rippling with excitement. The coordinates indicate a point in neutral space, approximately midway between our current position and the estimated location of their civilization. And the time frame? Admiral Zixtaral inquired. Approximately 6 standard months from now, the coordinator replied. Sufficient time for both parties to prepare, but soon enough to indicate genuine interest in establishing contact. The Tellurian representative made a gesture that the translators rendered as cautious. We should not rush to accept this invitation without thorough analysis of all potential security implications. Agreed, the Admiral said. But neither should we delay unnecessarily. This is precisely the outcome we hoped for when we initiated this project. Ethan nodded. They're offering us exactly what we wanted, a chance for direct communication, for real dialogue. We'd be fools not to take it. The Admiral's upper limbs twitched in what Ethan had come to recognize as his version of thoughtful consideration. The Confederation Council will need to approve any formal response, of course. But I believe I can speak for the Vextari delegation in saying that we support acceptance of this invitation. The Quilath coordinator's appendages rippled in agreement. The consensus concurs. This represents an unprecedented opportunity for expansion of collective knowledge. All eyes turned to the Tellurian representative, whose species had been the most resistant to the entire contact initiative. After a moment of silence, they inclined their heads slightly. The Tellurian collective acknowledges the potential value of direct communication. We will not oppose acceptance of the invitation, provided appropriate security measures are implemented. It was as close to enthusiastic support as they were likely to get from the Tellurians, and Ethan felt a surge of triumph. They had done it, established first contact with a previously unknown civilization, and secured agreement from the often fractious Confederation members to proceed with direct dialogue. As the meeting transitioned to discussing the practical details of preparing for this historic encounter, Ethan found himself approached by Admiral Zixtaral. Your expertise has been instrumental in this success, Dr. Miller, the Admiral said, his translator giving his voice an unusually warm tone. The communication strategies you developed based on human-Vextari interactions provided the foundation for this breakthrough. Thank you, Admiral, Ethan replied, genuinely touched by the commendation. But it was truly a team effort. We all contributed our unique perspectives. Indeed, which is precisely the point. The Admiral's crystalline form shifted, casting prismatic patterns across the conference table. When the Vextari first encountered humans, we were alarmed by your species' compulsion to establish connections, to fill silence with what we perceived as meaningless chatter. We saw it as a weakness, a neurological deficiency that compelled you to waste energy on non-essential communication. And now? Ethan prompted when the Admiral paused. Now I believe we understand that what appeared to be a weakness may in fact be your species' greatest strength. The Admiral's four eyes blinked in sequence. The human capacity for connection, your ability to bridge gaps between profoundly different minds, may be precisely what the galaxy needs at this moment in its history. Ethan smiled slightly. Are you saying that small talk might save the galaxy, Admiral? The Admiral's translator emitted a sound that Ethan had come to recognize as his version of a dry chuckle. I would not go that far, Dr. Miller. But perhaps it might help us build a more connected one. As they turned their attention back to the ongoing discussion, Ethan found himself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought them here. What had begun as a profound cultural misunderstanding had evolved into something neither humans nor Vextari could have anticipated. A partnership that now stood at the threshold of potentially the most significant expansion of the galactic community in millennia. And it had all started with humans doing what they did best. Talking, connecting, reaching out across the void to say, in essence, "Hello, how are you? Nice place you've got here. Want to be friends?" The one human skill that had terrified advanced alien civilizations might just turn out to be the one they needed most. 1 year later, Ethan stood in the grand observation dome of the newly constructed Harmony Station, watching as the delegation from the Resonant Collective, the name the new civilization had given themselves, prepared to board their shuttle for the return journey to their ship. The first face-to-face meeting between the Confederation and the Resonance had exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. Despite profound differences in biology, psychology, and cultural development, the two groups had established meaningful communication and laid the groundwork for ongoing dialogue. The Resonance had turned out to be a fascinating species, vaguely cephalopod-like in appearance, with translucent bodies that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that formed a crucial part of their communication. They experienced reality as a blend of sensory inputs that they made little attempt to categorize as distinct from each other. Sound, light, information, emotion, mathematics, and art were all part of a unified perceptual continuum for them. This holistic approach to experience had initially made communication challenging, but the techniques developed during the human Vextari cultural exchange had provided a crucial foundation for building understanding. The Resonance had been particularly intrigued by human music and poetry, forms of expression that they found more comprehensible than the more information-dense communication styles of many Confederation species. As Ethan watched the Resonant delegation board their shuttle, their bodies pulsing with patterns that the translators rendered as expressions of gratitude and anticipation, he became aware of a presence beside him. "Admiral," he greeted Zix Taral without turning. "Come to see them off?" "Indeed." The Admiral's crystalline form caught the light from the station's ambient illumination, a historic moment worth witnessing. They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching as the shuttle detached from the station and began its journey back to the massive Resonant vessel hanging in space some distance away. "The Confederation Council has approved the establishment of a permanent diplomatic mission to the Resonant Collective," the Admiral said finally. "They have requested that you lead it, Dr. Miller." Ethan turned to look at the Vextari, surprised. "Me? I'm honored, but I would have thought they'd want someone with more diplomatic experience." "Experience in traditional diplomacy is not what this mission requires," the Admiral replied. "Your unique background in bridging communication gaps between profoundly different species makes you the logical choice." "I see." Ethan looked back at the departing shuttle, considering the implications. "And you, Admiral? Will you continue to be involved in this initiative?" "I will serve as the Vextari representative to the joint mission, yes." The Admiral's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "It seems fitting, given our history." Ethan smiled slightly. From being terrified by human small talk to jointly leading a diplomatic mission based on human communication principles, you've come a long way, Admiral. As have you, Dr. Miller. From attempting to engage Vextari officials in casual conversation about station architecture to developing communication protocols that have facilitated the most significant first contact in Confederation history, they fell into another comfortable silence, watching as the Resonant shuttle docked with their main vessel. After a few moments, the massive ship began to move, its unique propulsion system creating ripples of distortion in the fabric of space itself. "They're beautiful," Ethan said quietly. "Their whole approach to existence, this integration of art and information and emotion, it's like nothing we've ever encountered." Indeed. And yet, humans proved more capable of adapting to their communication style than any other Confederation species. The Admiral's upper limbs twitched in what Ethan had come to recognize as thoughtful consideration, perhaps because you already blur these distinctions in your own way. "I'll take that as a compliment. It was intended as an observation, but you may interpret it as you wish." There was definitely a dry humor in the Admiral's tone now, as the Resonant vessel accelerated away, leaving behind only the promise of future communication and cooperation. Ethan found himself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought the galaxy to this point. What had begun as a cultural misunderstanding between humans and Vextari, the perception of human small talk as a form of psychological warfare, had evolved into a profound partnership that had now opened the door to an entirely new dimension of interspecies understanding. The one human skill that had once terrified advanced alien civilizations had turned out to be exactly what the galaxy needed: the compulsion to connect, to reach across boundaries, to fill silences not with emptiness but with possibility. Humans, it turned out, were the galaxy's natural diplomats, not despite their incessant chattering, but because of it. Admiral Zix Taral turned to Ethan, his crystalline form catching the light in a way that seemed almost deliberately dramatic. Dr. Miller, I believe this calls for what humans term a celebration. I understand your species typically marks significant achievements with gatherings involving food, beverages, and... The Admiral's translator gave his voice a quality that might almost have been resignation. Extensive small talk. Ethan couldn't help but laugh. You've been studying our customs, Admiral. One must understand one's allies, the Admiral replied, his upper limbs performing a gesture that Ethan had come to recognize as indicating wry amusement, even their more perplexing behaviors. Well, I would be honored to organize a proper human celebration, with adjustments for Vextari comfort, of course. I would expect nothing less. The Admiral's four eyes focused on him with what might have been warmth, or at least the Vextari equivalent. We have come a long way from our first encounter, have we not? From terror to tolerance to partnership, Ethan agreed. Not bad for a species that can't shut up and another that values silence above all else. Perhaps that is the lesson in all of this, Dr. Miller. The Admiral's crystalline form shifted, casting prismatic patterns across the observation dome's floor. That true understanding emerges not when one side converts to the other's way of being, but when both find value in their differences. That's surprisingly philosophical coming from you, Admiral. I have been exposed to excessive human influence. It appears to have affected my communication patterns. The Admiral's translator definitely conveyed dry humor now. Most concerning. As they turned to leave the observation dome, Ethan reflected that the universe was full of surprises. Who would have imagined that humanity's most annoying trait, their inability to stop talking, would turn out to be their greatest gift to galactic civilization? Or that the Vextari, who had once found human small talk literally terrifying, would come to appreciate its value in bridging the gaps between profoundly different minds. Life, it seemed, was full of ironies, especially when it came to interspecies communication. So, Admiral, Ethan said as they walked toward the station's central hub. Lovely station, isn't it? The architectural design is really quite remarkable. And how about that view of the nebula? Stunning, don't you think? Oh, and have I mentioned the fascinating research I've been doing on comparative communication patterns in crystalline-based life forms? All four of the Admiral's eyes swiveled to fix on him, and for a moment Ethan feared he'd gone too far. Then the Admiral's translator emitted what could only be described as a sigh. You are attempting humor, Dr. Miller. Guilty as charged, Admiral. I see. A pause. It is not entirely unsuccessful. Coming from a Vextari, this was high praise indeed. Thank you, Admiral. I'll be here all week. Don't forget to tip your translator. And as they continued down the corridor, Ethan could have sworn he heard the Admiral's crystalline form emit what sounded suspiciously like a chuckle. The galaxy would never be the same. The end.